You know, I really, really wanted to do this topic because I think it's super important, and yet it does come across as a little bit of a downer. Talking about loneliness, even typing in loneliness in the title for this live video, I was like, oh wow, yeah, that's real click worthy. People are gonna love clicking on that. And yet, I think that that is part of what makes loneliness so tough. That's what has it gripping us so intensely, is that we don't talk about it. That's why I wanted to do this. I wanted to just have a discussion. I will put the disclaimer out right now that I do not have all the answers here. Some of the things that I'm going to be suggesting is going to be me throwing paint at the wall in order for us to have a discussion. The feedback really is that loneliness antidote and us connecting. That's what I'm going to be touching on. I mentioned in the earlier video this week that loneliness, I said, was common for women. Now, that's just because I coach women and I know that it's common for them, but really this is a human issue, and it's a multifaceted one. Your experiences, your perspectives are absolutely invaluable here today. Please, please share them. No one is an expert on you but you. No one is an expert on you but you. This idea came back onto mind to talk about loneliness because several months back, I did this very informal survey of women. I was curious about their challenges, I was curious about their joys, and where they seek support. I was also deeply interested in knowing what their most pervasive struggles are. Loneliness consistently came up as a struggle. Now, these were all women that seemed outwardly connected, but they still struggled with feeling separate at times. This is the mind boggler here, isn't it? Does anyone else see this irony? If I were to ask a question in a room full of people, raise your hands, who here has ever felt lonely? Everyone likely would raise their hands. Now, this kind of creates this own syndrome, which I am calling today the closed door syndrome. When we don't speak up and we hide how we feel behind closed doors, we think we're alone. We think we're isolated in how we feel. We've got to be the only ones that feel this way. This is why it was so mind-boggling to repeatedly see the same struggle of loneliness coming up in this survey. And it is amazing. We're all feeling the same thing, but we don't speak up because we think we're abnormal. There's something that's not right about us, with us. We further isolate when speaking up could be the very thing that connects us. Now, for today's purposes, I am going to define loneliness as just an experience of a lack of intimacy, a lack of closeness, because it doesn't always mean being physically alone. Who knows? We can feel perfectly alone and be surrounded by a room full of people or certain people who we feel should know us, our family, whatever that may be. Loneliness is the perception or feeling of being alone. So I'm going to define it for today's purpose. Another way that this can come up is when we're not feeling heard. Nothing makes me feel more alone than when I have those times of not feeling heard. We are naturally social creatures. We have a base need to connect. It affects us on a physical level to be disconnected. So you're not making it up that this hurts. Loneliness hurts physically sometimes. And I think, just opinion, that depression is a form of this kind of disconnect. When we are disconnected, it can be related to depression. Let's talk about what gets in the way. What stops us from connecting? What could be causes of this loneliness? Because some of it, it's really, 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 really important, especially as I move into what gets in the way and offering some solutions, that right off the bat, I talk about how we need to not put ourselves at fault. There's a difference between making us wrong for creating our experiences and choosing to actively do something about it. When you guys have questions later watching this replay, if you need me to continually make that clear, please pop in questions because I will respond as we go. That being said, some of the things that stop us from connecting, some of these things are genetic. Some of this loneliness, maybe there's a genetic component. It's not our fault that there's a disconnect here. And sometimes there are outside forces that contribute to loneliness that can seem extremely out of our control, that we really can't do anything about it. For today's purposes, again, I'm going to talk about the ways in which we want to do something about it, when we want to change. I'm speaking to those parts today, not the parts where there are things that are out of your control. I'm just speaking to the things that you want to change. And for me, I know what gets in the way for me the most and stops me from reaching out is often my view of my own inadequacy. There's something wrong about me that perpetuates this cycle of disconnect. I'm not enough in some way, so I can't reach out, or I've burdened people too much, or there's something that people don't like, that they don't want to be around me when I feel like this. Whatever it is, it's our feelings of inadequacy that can stop us from reaching out. That's one thing that gets in the way. Another thing that can get in the way of this closeness, this connection, that is the opposite of this loneliness, is that, maybe we're out and about, we're being friendly, we're around people, but we're not being open enough to create real connection. If we're not being vulnerable enough to create that real connection, that can lead us to situations where, we're out and about in public and everybody's making small talk. Nobody's really alone, but it feels really lonely. Small talk can miss the mark because there's no shared emotion. That's what I mean about sometimes we're being friendly, but we're not being open enough to make a true connection. It's the underlying emotion beneath the surface. How's the weather? How are you doing? How's family? How's kids? How do you feel about that? That's completely the opposite of small talk. That creates connection. That creates a shared experience. I'm going to touch on that more later. Some other things that can get in the way of us connecting that can contribute to this loneliness. Any views that we have that we are separate from the other. I am different from you because. You are different from me because. These are very isolating perspectives. And sometime maybe I'll get on my soapbox about why I think that is truly one of the biggest problems in our world right now, is seeing us as separate from the other, which is a really deep spiritual conversation that we can have sometime if you guys want. Anything that we see is different. It isolates us. I am different from that person. I have this, they have that. I can't do that, they can do this. It is isolating, polarizing, separating, disconnecting. We can also do this with ourselves. The rejection of self. Anytime we can't accept all parts of ourselves, that is separating. That can get in the way of us experiencing being okay with just who we are and in the moment. I'm going to touch on that at the very end about being okay and just being alone. Again, there are no right answers to this. If we look for differences, that's all we're going to see. If we look for differences. Now that there is this common human experience in how we feel, there may be different triggering issues, but the emotions, the underlying emotions are all the same. And that's what is so wild about this survey. The results of this informal survey that I did was that this survey showed that even our deepest feelings are likely shared by others. Maybe the overlying reasons are different, but the deepest feelings are likely shared by other people. In fact, maybe more than likely, but we have to share them, not hide them, not see us as different, separate, disconnected, in order for that connection to be made. I'm going to throw some paint at the wall here with some options for solutions for those of you, again, who want to do something different. I'm going to throw out the disclaimer that there is nothing wrong with you. There's nothing broken. There's nothing that you need to change. Nothing. This, if anything, is an opportunity to create resilience in the situation that you have. If you play around, experiment, get curious with any of these things, or just look at it a different way, or just have a conversation about this. Talk with somebody else after you watch the replay. Have a conversation. All of this can create resilience in those situations where we are experiencing loneliness. Resilience helps to get through it. I'm gonna, for these purposes of throwing paint on the wall with solutions, I'm gonna focus on when we remove ourselves and rather than the situation being out of our control, and speak to those parts that we might want to do something different. If you don't want to do something different, take what works and leave the rest. There is no prescription here, just visibility, just connection. The antidote that I spoke to in that earlier video is just to come out in the open, to speak out, and thereby connect. And be welcomed for what we feel. That's the antidote to loneliness. What you feel is never wrong. It's just what we do with it that matters. So take what you want, leave the rest, and your opinions are extremely valuable here. An antidote for loneliness could be caring for a pet, especially one that really needs you. Adopting one is a great antidote there. Or borrow someone else's dog and go to the dog park. People love to connect to the dog park because it's super easy to talk about dogs. Everybody can talk about dogs at a dog park because likely everybody loves their dogs. People love to talk about the things that they enjoy. That is an option. Even caring for a plant in this situation can help. It's something that you can nurture. The idea is to give something of yourself to someone, something outside of yourself. Joining a team, connecting with like-minded people, whatever kind of team situation that just puts you out there in that situation where you can try on some principles of deeper connection or just be out and about. And that deeper connection is about being authentic. When we let our true colors show and be who we are, that's when we really find our tribe. And that is extremely welcoming. There's the community. There's the opposite of loneliness. But we can't find our tribe, those people that truly resonate with us, if we're behind closed doors or somehow putting masks on. I did a video on authenticity a little while back, and I haven't watched it in a while, but I'm sure it speaks to that. Any kind of hobby that you can get into and finding a way to share it. Getting a camera gets you out and about, connected, and doing something that's stimulating. Hobbies. getting involved in a hobby, anything that gets us out, gets us doing something we're passionate about, likely we'll be able to connect with others that are passionate about it as well. At the very least, it's doing something for ourselves, which is a loving way to give back when we're feeling disconnected. Meetup groups, meetup.com is a great way to do that. Church groups, any kind of gatherings where people regularly go. Taking classes to learn something or brush up on a new skill. Every so often, again, this is a personal choice. If you choose to do this, push yourself out rather than hermit. Yeah, with the caveat that there's nothing wrong with hermiting. It's only if you choose that it is uncomfortable for you and you want to do something different, then I would support you in that and say, yeah, sometimes you got to push yourself a little bit. Walking, exercise of any kind, at least gets us feeling better, but could get us out and about in a place where there are other people to connect with. Going on an adventure, even if it is a solo one, take a random bus, take a random train, change your environment, be in the company of strangers, compliment someone. I have a wonderful model of this in my own household. Boy, is she a wonderful pioneer. She will compliment strangers left and right, and it's a fabulous way to connect. And it's so funny to watch people where sometimes they're a little disarmed, like, who is this person who's giving me random compliments? And I always think, why don't we do that? Why don't we do more of that? Getting out and about, compliment a random stranger, make their day. That's a great way to connect. If you're really alone, you could capitalize on it. Capitalize on it. These are the times when you don't have somebody telling you to do something different. Capitalize on it. Dance naked. Whatever you need. Have some moments for yourself that you can only have when you're alone. Do things that you can only do when you're alone. Yeah? Okay, this is what this alone time can be for. It's a great time to develop a relationship with you if you choose to do that with this time. Online resources for when you can't get out for whatever reason. At the very least, Skype, FaceTime, these things are available to connect with people. There are online chat groups for those same aforementioned hobbies. It doesn't always mean getting out. Those things are great. Physical human touch is lovely, but it doesn't have to shut you down and say, oh, I have no ways of connecting. Thank you, internets, for the opportunity to connect when otherwise we may be semi-isolated in our own homes. There's some fascinating research out there on loneliness that speaks to this being evident of our changing time and changing from living in communities to living isolated in our own homes. So that again speaks to things that are different than how we are naturally wired, that we don't have to make ourselves wrong for dealing with a society, a culture that is naturally isolating and separating. Charity, volunteering, anything, especially for senior citizens who are a demographic that struggles with loneliness. Hello. Isn't that like one of the most amazing ways to combat this? Go give your shared company to someone else who might need it more. It's pretty leveling. They're also very appreciative. There's a great situation where you don't have to be perfect. Just showing up as you are is so appreciated in that situation. Volunteering your time, especially with senior citizens. And then it's an opportunity for some great downtime techniques if you really are alone, and especially if you're not making yourself wrong for it. Those of you who are great at this are going to be the ones who are wonderful at those ways of nurturing the self when they are alone, and they love that time. If it isn't comfortable for you, that's some great time to beef up on those skills that we need in order to nurture ourselves, those self-soothing techniques, anything to nurture yourself when you can't change your situation at the moment. Meditating, journaling, read fiction. What a great way to escape into the most creative parts of our brain. Anything that we do with our hands, painting, cooking, creating something, that's a wonderful way to use that downtime. Learning to love ourselves is huge. So any rituals that we can put in place when there are times of being that physically alone, what beautiful rituals can we create around that in order to love ourselves, to appreciate our life, to appreciate the present moment. And it is a good time, if you're brave and if you choose, to look at the cause for this isolation. Take action when it is possible, when you want to. Look at the causes for it. Dig a little deep. Self-growth. Hey, great opportunity for some self-growth. And then the last thing that I would suggest looking at, for those of you who want to, is this deeper cause for disconnect that I mentioned earlier, which is a spiritual one. If we adopt the perspective that we are all connected, in whatever way you define it, I can share my definitions if you want to, but this isn't about me. But in the ways that you see that we are connected, this is when we can be alone and still feel like we are a part of a larger whole. Some people would call that a relationship with God. Some people would call that relationship with earth and nature. Whatever you call it, that's your access to connection and feeling like you're part of something bigger than yourself. So there's a very spiritual conversation around this loneliness. I think it's the opposite of our true spirituality. I think it's normal and natural process. I think that as human beings in life, we're going to go through these periods of disconnect. I think that is part of our human experience, is to experience this disconnect. But it's just in an effort to remember that we are a part of a larger whole. Sometimes it takes seeing the opposite of what is true to recognize the real whole truth. I'll just plant that seed. It's a fun conversation for any of you who like to dive into that sort of thing. I'm about done. Takeaways. Sometimes you do really feel like you can't control your surroundings or change anything. The only thing you can change is you and your perspective on your surroundings. And even that sometimes can feel impossible. Again, permission. You're okay. It doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. If you choose to take on anything that has been brought up, choose it. If it doesn't work for you, let it go. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing that you need to change. These are all things to manage a fleeting loneliness. Anything that lingers, anything that's chronic, know that you deserve support, that it's okay to reach out, to ask for help from a counselor, a therapist, someone trusted in your community, a coach, whoever it is, if it's chronic, if it's lingering. Every single one of you has value. Every single one of you. We all have something to contribute. I firmly believe that's why we're here. There's always something about us that is needed out there, that someone will resonate with, that is just a perfect fit. We are all here for a reason in our unique makeup to contribute, to be a part of the larger whole. So we all have value. Now, as you go along the way, always celebrating those baby steps. Hey, anytime you get yourself out of the house and say hi to the mailman, good on you. Celebrate those baby steps. You gotta acknowledge yourself along the way. Otherwise, we stay stuck. And the overall takeaway message that I wanted to leave with is that this, I think, my opinion, the secret to connecting with others is through shared experiences and empathy. connecting on that emotional level. And I saw something very similar, paraphrased by a gentleman named Clay Andrews, that the true connection is again through that underlying. What connects us as human beings? How do we feel? Not necessarily the superficial issues, but how do we feel about those issues? Shared emotion. The secret to connecting with ourselves when we are alone, that's the spiritual practice. You could call it spiritual, you could call it not. You could call it your self-love ritual. It doesn't matter. It's connecting to you, whether you see that as a spiritual experience or not. How do you enjoy the time with yourself? And that, could be the religion that you name, whatever your name is. This is my religion. This is what I do. These are my rituals and my way of celebrating me. So it's all about what you do to enjoy your own company and experience the magic in the given moment, whatever is there. The last thing that I'll leave with, I alluded to in the beginning, is something that I know about Eckhart Tolle from reading, I believe it's in The Power of Now, where he talks about going through an experience where he was so disconnected, so depressed, and he had a jarring reversal in that, where he ended up being in a position where he was sitting on park benches for hours, completely in a state of bliss, never feeling more alive and connected, by himself on the park bench. He was alone, but not lonely, because he saw himself as being part of such a grander experience going on around him. So there could be a perspective shift opportunity here, and noticing the connection to everything. Thank you for those of you who comment later. Bye.